No one ever listened to me before tonight. The words slipped out of my mouth without thinking as I balanced the tray of champagne flutes, my hands trembling slightly and my knees threatening to buckle under the weight. The Grande Hotel's ballroom shimmered with gold-leafed ceilings and crystal chandeliers, but none of it felt glamorous, only overwhelming. I wove through clusters of Manhattan's elite, my green eyes darting nervously from one polished face to the next, aware of the judgment resting like a silent fog over every step I took. The accent that had always marked me as different clung to my words, making even the simplest requests sound foreign, and the polite smiles of the wealthy clients often turned into barely concealed smirks. Each time a glass clinked against another or a tray wobbled beneath me, I flinched, fearing their whispers would cut through the soft string quartet playing in the background. My uniform, black and pressed, felt like armor I'd outgrown, hiding the bruises from long shifts and late nights spent at nursing school, but powerless against the subtle, dismissive glances that followed me. Then he entered. Dominic Marino. Tall, impossibly composed, with dark hair slicked back and eyes like molten chocolate, scanning the room with a presence that seemed to silence the air itself. His tailored black suit moved perfectly with him, as if the fabric recognized the authority in his steps, and the faint scent of his cologne cut through the warm air of champagne and perfume, demanding attention. He stopped near the terrace, his gaze slicing through the crowd, and my heart stumbled in its rhythm, muscles tightening as if warning me of some unseen shift. I dropped a hand to steady my tray, my breath hitching as he turned slightly, the lights catching a faint scar along his jawline that somehow made him more formidable. My thoughts scattered, I wasn't sure if it was fear or awe, or both, that left me frozen. A group of nervous men near the corner exchanged hurried words, their voices trailing off as Dominic's attention seemed to fixate on me. My tray tilted slightly, and a few flutes clinked dangerously, a sound that made my stomach drop. His eyes followed every motion, calculating, patient, yet unyielding. The chatter of the wealthy elite faded, replaced by the quickened pulse in my ears. And then, without raising his voice, without a gesture more than a slow, deliberate step forward, he made them all stop. The room exhaled as if held by invisible strings, and I realized I was the center of that command, small and fragile yet suddenly shielded by the weight of his presence. My chest rose and fell rapidly, awareness of every heartbeat magnified as I glanced at him, trying to understand why a man like him would notice a waitress like me, why his shadow seemed to offer protection in a space that had always overlooked me. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could catch the warmth radiating from his body, the precise control in the angle of his shoulders, the certainty in the dark, calculating eyes that now seemed to hold an entire story I wasn't privy to. He said nothing at first, just stood, observing, and I felt the unspoken declaration, I would be safe here, if he chose it. The nervous twitch in my hands eased slightly, the tray now steady, but my mind raced with questions, awe, and the strange relief of being seen. For the first time in my life, the accent that had always set me apart did not draw ridicule, it drew attention, respect, and an undeniable sense of security. Dominic Marino's presence had shifted the room, and in that single, suspended moment, I realized that everything had changed, and that for the first time, no one would disregard me while he stood near. The crystal flutes rested evenly on my tray, but my pulse was far from steady, the echo of his gaze still lingering in my mind like an unshakable weight. I adjusted the strap of my apron, aware of the soft thrum of anxiety threading through my shoulders, and tried to focus on the table in front of me. The couple sitting there had just received their drinks, their expressions polite yet distant, unaware that the room had shifted subtly, every conversation now bending around the presence of Dominic Marino. I moved through the crowd carefully, each step measured, listening to the faint whispers and the soft clatter of glass. Under my careful hands, trying to maintain the rhythm of service that had carried me through countless nights like this one. A waiter bumped past me accidentally, spilling a small drop of white wine, and I froze, my fingers tightening reflexively on the tray as the droplets landed on the polished marble floor. Dominic was there before I could apologize, his presence a calm but commanding buffer between me and the murmuring onlookers, a single raised hand enough to halt attention and redirect it to him. My eyes flicked to him, green against chocolate brown, and I caught a hint of the corner of a smile, subtle but reassuring, that spoke more than words ever could in this gilded, intimidating hall. The music continued, delicate strings weaving between the murmurs of affluent voices, yet it felt quieter somehow, as though the walls themselves acknowledged the unspoken protection that he provided. A small child ran past, giggling, nearly brushing against my leg, and I caught a reflexive glance from Dominic, his eyebrows lifting ever so slightly, scanning the perimeter, ensuring that none of the minor disruptions escalated into something that could threaten the order he had established with mere presence. My hand steadied, my breath evened, and I found myself moving with a cautious grace I had not known was possible in such an imposing environment. Each guest I approached received my polite, careful attention, yet I felt a subtle shift in how they regarded me, perhaps sensing the silent endorsement of the man whose authority had filled the room moments before. A vase of orchids nearly toppled as I maneuvered past a table, and my heart leapt into my throat, but Dominic's hand brushed the edge of my elbow lightly, guiding the tray and steadying my motion without any need for words. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, yet it radiated a certainty that was both grounding and disarming. I could feel the tension of the evening easing, the sharp edges of anxiety softening as I realized that his attention was not intrusive but protective, a shield that allowed me to navigate the overwhelming space with newfound confidence. The chandeliers above caught the reflection of our movements, and I felt a curious mix of awe and gratitude, my accent and timid posture no longer markers of vulnerability but features acknowledged and subtly honored in the presence of someone whose understanding did not require translation. As I reached the last table on my route, a sense of accomplishment mingled with disbelief. I had traversed the room, managed the fragile balance of service, and felt an undercurrent of safety that had seemed impossible moments earlier. Dominic remained at a distance, a silent sentinel, his dark eyes flicking over the room, measuring, evaluating, guarding, and yet leaving me the space to breathe, to exist in a way I had not thought possible in a space so intimidating. The tension that had threatened to unravel me when I first entered began to ebb, replaced by a cautious optimism, the knowledge that someone of undeniable power and presence recognized my effort, my existence, and without a single harsh word, had made the crowded, ornate hall feel a place where I could belong, at least for this evening. The night stretched on, and the soft hum of conversation mingled with the distant clinking of silverware, but I no longer felt like I was drifting unseen among the gilded tables. Every step I took carried the subtle weight of Dominic Marino's gaze, grounding me in a way that made the room feel less like a maze of judgment and more like a space where I could navigate without faltering. I approached a table near the balcony where the city light streamed through tall windows, reflecting in the crystal flutes and casting tiny prisms across the polished marble. I refilled glasses with careful precision, measuring each pour, listening to the murmured compliments and subdued laughter, aware of how the balance of the room had shifted, how the collective attention now flickered briefly toward Dominic whenever anyone hesitated or whispered. A minor accident occurred when a chair scraped too loudly against the floor, and I felt the familiar pang of panic, but he was there again, a subtle step closer, not speaking, just radiating authority, and the tension ebbed as I straightened, my shoulders lifting slightly from their protective curl. Guests seemed to sense the difference, their subtle glances now accompanied by a kind of wary respect, as if the air itself had acknowledged the shift in dynamics. I moved past the dessert station, adjusting my pace to accommodate the polished floors and the occasional scattered tray, noticing the faint scent of vanilla and polished wood mingling in the air, grounding me in the immediate moment. Dominic's presence remained at the periphery of my awareness, a steadying force that reminded me I was not alone in navigating this unfamiliar world. I took a deep breath, focusing on each tray, each glass, each careful step, and realized the nervous tension that had defined the evening was softening into something almost manageable. A young intern accidentally bumped into a chair behind me, and my reflexes were immediate, steadying the tray with a small shift of my hand, feeling a brief warmth against my elbow as Dominic's presence provided reassurance without intrusion. The music rose subtly, a swelling of violins that echoed softly against the high ceilings, but I was no longer lost in it. I was aware, present, supported, and for the first time, I felt a quiet confidence threading through my movements. Each patron I served now received my attention with an evenness that felt unfamiliar yet empowering, and the subtle glances exchanged between Dominic and the surrounding staff reinforced an unspoken understanding that the room was, for this moment, balanced by his presence. I felt a sense of rhythm developing, each step, each pour, each polite acknowledgement contributing to a larger choreography, one that I was only now beginning to perceive, guided by the quiet, commanding influence of someone who had silently claimed the space, not with aggression, but with unshakable poise. My chest expanded slightly as I moved toward the final tables, aware that the evening had shifted in ways I could not have predicted, and that the aura of protection and quiet authority lingering in the room allowed me to perform, to exist, and to be seen not as an outsider, but as someone acknowledged and respected in this brief, shimmering bubble of the night. The final trays were carried to the last table with a careful rhythm, my hands moving steadily as my awareness stretched across the room, noting each glimmer of light on crystal, each subtle movement of the guests, and the way Dominic's presence subtly shifted the space around him. His dark eyes remained attentive, scanning with precision, a quiet authority that made the staff adjust their pace unconsciously, while I felt a strange reassurance bloom in my chest, the kind that steadied nerves and aligned focus. I paused briefly to offer a refilled glass to an elderly couple, their polite smiles tinged with appreciation, and in that moment, I realized that the hushed whispers about my accent had faded, replaced by an almost imperceptible respect that had been invisible only moments ago. Dominic's subtle nod to a server passing by was enough to correct a minor misstep, and I felt the ripple of that control as a comforting undercurrent. A soft chime from the balcony door reminded me that a group had just entered, laughter and footsteps carrying through the polished hall, and I adjusted my path to weave between them, aware of the increased density of movement and the need to maintain balance. Dominic's gaze followed me, not intrusive but protective, a silent reminder that the room's flow could be navigated with confidence under his watchful presence. The string quartet's melody seemed to synchronize with my movements, each note a gentle cue, allowing my anxiety to soften and giving space for my natural rhythm to emerge. As I approached a table near the center, the reflection of chandeliers above caught the edges of my tray, creating tiny prisms that danced across the polished marble, and I noticed the subtle change in the room's energy. The guests spoke in hushed tones, not from fear but from the recognition of the order Dominic had established without a word. I adjusted my stance, feeling my shoulders relax slightly, the rigid tension easing into a poised alertness that allowed for a more fluid navigation of the crowded floor. Each table received the same careful attention, yet the undercurrent of his presence transformed my actions from mechanical to intentional, creating a quiet grace that had been absent in my earlier rounds. I felt my pulse align with the rhythm of the room, the once overwhelming noise now a background hum, the weight of expectation softened by Dominic's silent support. A young couple whispered a question to each other, and I responded with clarity and calm, realizing that the slight change in my voice and demeanor was the product of the confidence imparted by the subtle, steadying force at the edge of my awareness. The final guest raised a glass in a small, polite toast, and I managed a brief, genuine smile, acknowledging the gesture while feeling the echo of Dominic's vigilance as a protective layer that had transformed an intimidating space into one where I could move, speak, and be noticed without hesitation. The evening pressed forward, each step taken with newfound assurance, each interaction smoother, and in the peripheral vision, I glimpsed Dominic, still standing tall, a quiet sentinel whose presence had not only altered the room but had given me, for the first time that night, a sense of belonging and safety in a world that had always seemed to overlook me. The room had begun to settle into a quieter rhythm, the earlier tension diffused into a subtle, steady hum of activity, yet my senses remained alert, tuned to the faintest shifts in movement and conversation. I navigated between tables, refilling glasses and offering polite smiles, aware of every glance and gesture, my accent no longer a source of hesitation but a marker of identity that commanded a different kind of attention. Dominic remained a silent presence near the terrace, tall and composed, his eye scanning the room with an unspoken vigilance that created a protective perimeter around me without ever intruding, and the awareness of that shield allowed me to move with an ease I had not known moments before. A group of young professionals approached the bar for cocktails, laughing softly, and I guided them to their seats with careful courtesy, feeling the subtle shift of energy as their attention briefly flicked toward Dominic, acknowledging the authority that radiated from his quiet stance. Each footstep across the polished floor, each careful adjustment of a tray, carried with it a growing confidence, a realization that the environment could be navigated successfully with awareness and precision rather than fear. The soft hum of conversation intertwined with the gentle strains of the string quartet, creating a layered soundtrack that underscored the subtle dance of service and observation, and I noticed how the interplay of light from the chandeliers reflected off crystal and glass, casting delicate patterns across the tables and floors, a visual reminder of the elegance that surrounded us even in the midst of tension. A young guest accidentally nudged a chair, and I moved swiftly to steady the tray, feeling the faintest brush of Dominic's presence as a reassurance, a reminder that attention and care could coexist with authority. The murmurs of nearby patrons were subdued, their gestures more measured, as if the shift in the room's dynamic had permeated every interaction, and I realized that the presence of someone who held such command in a quiet, deliberate manner had transformed the space into one where courtesy and awareness carried greater weight than status or volume. I adjusted my posture, taking a deep breath, letting the rhythm of the evening guide me, each step and motion becoming a part of the choreography that had emerged organically under the silent guidance of Dominic's observation. The faint scent of polished wood and subtle perfume filled the air, grounding me in the present, and I moved to a table near the center, offering attentive service with calm assurance, noticing how the guests responded with renewed engagement and measured conversation. The previous tensions and misinterpretations softened into a shared experience of observation and care. As the evening progressed, I felt the ebb and flow of attention around me, the subtle interplay between my actions and Dominic's presence creating a dynamic that allowed me to exist with confidence and poise, my accent no longer a point of doubt but a feature recognized and accommodated in a space that had once seemed impenetrable. Each interaction, each careful gesture, built upon the last, creating a tapestry of attentiveness and subtle authority, a rhythm that carried me through the remainder of the evening, leaving me with a sense of accomplishment, relief, and an understanding that the presence of someone whose attention and composure commanded respect could alter the very atmosphere of a room, granting safety and affirmation in ways that words alone could not convey. The evening had settled into a gentle rhythm, with the string quartet's melodies weaving a soft undercurrent through the air, and I moved between tables with a precision that had become instinctive, every motion measured yet fluid. Dominic remained near the terrace, a tall, composed presence, his eye scanning the room with a quiet authority that seemed to settle every subtle disturbance before it could ripple into chaos. I paused for a moment near the center of the hall, adjusting my grip on the tray as I observed the interaction between two guests, their conversation soft but animated, and I realized that the once overwhelming din of the room now carried a manageable rhythm, each note and word a part of a larger choreography that I could navigate with awareness and confidence. A waiter passed by, nearly colliding with my elbow, and I corrected the tray smoothly, feeling the invisible reassurance of Dominic's presence as if it lent steadiness to my movements without needing to touch or speak. The reflections from the chandeliers above caught in the crystal glasses, scattering tiny points of light across the marble floors, and I moved through them with care, aware that the visual beauty of the room now mirrored the internal balance I felt as I guided each guest with polite attention. Dominic's subtle adjustments to his stance, a slight shift of weight or a deliberate step, seemed to communicate to the staff and me alike, an unspoken signal that recalibrated the flow of service with silent precision. Each table received the same deliberate care, yet the atmosphere had transformed from tension to an almost harmonious blend of attentiveness and respect, and I noticed how my accent, once a point of insecurity, now drew curiosity and interest, a reflection of the recognition Dominic's presence had brought to the room. The soft rustle of gowns and the muted clinking of cutlery created a background hum, but it no longer felt overwhelming. It was a measured accompaniment to my movements, allowing me to breathe and act with poise. A guest inadvertently dropped a napkin, and I reached to retrieve it, my fingers steady, sensing the faintest nod from Dominic's direction that reinforced a subtle assurance and encouragement. I continued to move through the hall, filling glasses and offering courteous smiles, each gesture precise and intentional, while the awareness of being observed by someone of commanding presence lent a calm confidence I had not known before. The ambient lighting highlighted the edges of every table and crystal, a dance of shadows and soft illumination that complemented the quiet control Dominic maintained over the room, and I felt the rhythm of service and protection intertwine, guiding my steps. As I approached the final tables near the balcony, the city lights streaming through the windows added a delicate glow, and I carried out each task with attentiveness and grace, recognizing that the evening had shifted in a way that allowed for safety, clarity, and a subtle elegance in every interaction. Dominic's presence lingered, not overpowering but quietly defining the space, and I realized that for the first time in my memory, the room felt navigable, respectful, and steady, a place where my actions, my voice, and my presence could coexist with confidence, and where the unseen authority surrounding me ensured that the rhythm of the night flowed smoothly and deliberately, leaving a sense of calm and order in its wake. The evening was approaching its final stretch, the gentle notes of the string quartet winding through the room like a soft current, and I moved between tables with a confidence that had grown quietly over the past hour. Dominic remained a steady presence, tall and composed near the terrace, his posture exuding an understated authority that seemed to settle the flow of activity around him without a single word. I adjusted my tray as I approached a cluster of guests near the center, noticing how the ambient lighting highlighted the edges of the glassware, creating tiny reflections that danced across the polished marble, and I felt a subtle ease in my movements, the anxiety that had once defined my shifts now replaced with a measured attentiveness. A server carried a tray past me, nearly brushing against my elbow, and I corrected my position instinctively, sensing the quiet reassurance of Dominic's presence as a stabilizing influence, a silent acknowledgement that allowed me to focus fully on my task without second-guessing each motion. The conversations around me continued in subdued tones, polite laughter mixing with soft murmurs, yet the subtle power he radiated had transformed the atmosphere, creating a layer of calm control that reached every corner of the room. I paused for a brief moment to refill a glass for a young couple, their smiles warm and genuine, and I realized that the previous tensions and whispered judgments regarding my accent had dissipated, replaced by a recognition that seemed to carry through the space with the gentle weight of authority. The chandeliers above cast a soft glow, illuminating each step I took, and I moved with a rhythm that blended awareness, precision, and newfound assurance, each gesture deliberate yet fluid, each motion part of a larger, unspoken choreography that Dominic's presence had shaped. A server dropped a napkin nearby, and I bent smoothly to retrieve it, feeling the subtle shift in energy as Dominic's eyes briefly flicked in that direction, conveying calm support without the need for words, reinforcing the sense that the room could be navigated confidently and with ease. Each table received attention with careful consideration, each gesture polished yet gentle, as I realized that the sense of protection and oversight he provided allowed me to act with poise and clarity, my movements no longer tentative but intentional, guided by awareness and the quiet influence of someone whose mere presence commanded respect. I continued to weave through the hall, balancing trays and acknowledging guests with measured politeness, and the once overwhelming space felt manageable, almost harmonious, as if the energy Dominic imparted had imbued the room with a rhythm that I could follow comfortably. The city lights from the balcony streamed in softly, casting elongated reflections across the floor, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in each interaction, in the subtle exchanges of acknowledgement, and in the knowledge that the presence of someone so composed and attentive could transform the perception of the room, creating an environment where careful action, focus, and composure were recognized, valued, and protected. As I reached the final tables, the sense of order and calm lingered, and I realized that the evening had shifted from a daunting challenge into a space where confidence, awareness, and subtle authority combined to allow me to navigate gracefully, each movement deliberate, each interaction meaningful, and the quiet presence of Dominic Marino ensured that the final moments of service were conducted with a sense of security, dignity, and measured elegance. The room had grown quieter as the evening progressed, the gentle harmonies of the string quartet filling the spaces between soft conversations and the subtle clinking of crystal, and I moved among the tables with an ease that had slowly become second nature. Dominic remained near the terrace, his posture steady and composed, radiating an authority that seemed to organize the entire space without effort, and I felt the reassuring presence of his gaze guiding the flow of activity around me. A group of guests had gathered near the far corner, their voices low but engaged, and I approached with careful attention, offering refills and attentive smiles, each motion deliberate and precise. The chandeliers above reflected softly on the polished surfaces, creating tiny prisms of light that danced across the floors and tables, and I felt the rhythm of the room sync with the cadence of my steps, each movement measured yet fluid. Dominic's eyes flicked occasionally to various points in the hall, not intrusively but with a subtle, quiet assurance that conveyed protection, his presence reinforcing the order and calm that had settled over the evening. I navigated between tables, adjusting my posture and grip on the tray, aware of every sound, every glance, and every shift in energy, and I realized that the earlier tension I had felt was replaced by a confidence that allowed me to move gracefully and serve efficiently. A child at a nearby table giggled, almost tipping a glass, and I reacted instinctively to steady it, feeling the faint warmth of Dominic's presence like an invisible hand ensuring stability, a reminder that careful attention and calm authority coexisted harmoniously in the space. The guest's conversation remained subdued, polite, and respectful, a subtle acknowledgement of the influence he had on the environment, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in the smooth progression of the evening. The soft glow from the city lights streaming through the windows complemented the warm tones of the chandeliers, casting long reflections across the floor and highlighting the fluid movement of both staff and patrons, creating a visual rhythm that echoed the subtle order Dominic maintained. I refilled the last glass at a table near the center, careful to maintain eye contact and polite engagement, and I noticed the small nods and smiles of appreciation that reflected a newfound attentiveness, a shift from earlier moments of distraction or dismissal. The interplay of light, sound, and motion gave the room a delicate, almost cinematic quality, and I felt my awareness sharpen as I moved from one table to the next, each gesture confident, each interaction purposeful. Dominic's presence, steady and controlled, anchored the space, ensuring that the guests were observed without intrusion and that the flow of activity remained smooth and respectful. The last guests were now enjoying their drinks, the laughter gentle and easy, and I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, the rhythm of the evening carrying me with a blend of poise, attentiveness, and quiet pride. The subtle interplay of his watchful gaze, the soft music, and the ambient light created a cocoon of calm within the grandeur of the hall, and I realized that for the first time in my memory, the space felt entirely navigable, safe, and unexpectedly welcoming, allowing me to perform my role with a confidence that had emerged only under the quiet, unspoken guidance of Dominic Marino. The final moments of the evening carried a sense of quiet resolution, the soft strains of the string quartet winding down, blending with the low murmur of satisfied guests who lingered over their drinks, their conversations now measured, respectful, and attentive. I moved carefully among the remaining tables, each step deliberate, each tray balanced with the care that had become second nature over the course of the night, and I felt a profound awareness of the shift that had occurred, a subtle transformation in both myself and the space around me. Dominic stood near the terrace, his posture unchanged, tall and composed, the aura of quiet authority he exuded stretching across the room like an invisible boundary that shaped every interaction without a single word. A guest accidentally dropped a small utensil, and I bent swiftly to retrieve it, feeling the reassuring weight of his presence as an unseen support, a silent signal that the environment was safe, that my movements were guided and acknowledged. The chandeliers cast their soft, warm glow, scattering points of light across polished surfaces, and I moved through the patterns with care and attentiveness, aware of how each reflection and shadow played against the room, enhancing the sense of order and harmony that Dominic's presence had created. Each table I approached received attentive service, my gestures precise, deliberate, and infused with a quiet confidence, and I could sense the shift in how guests responded, their glances now carrying curiosity, interest, and subtle respect rather than indifference. The soft rustle of gowns and the gentle clink of glassware provided a gentle rhythm that I followed naturally, each motion synchronized with the flow of the room, the interplay of light, sound, and movement creating a delicate harmony that allowed me to act with poise and assurance. Dominic's gaze moved over the room with quiet precision, not controlling but observing, and I felt the subtle influence of that watchful presence shape the way I navigated each interaction, creating a rhythm of calm attentiveness and gentle authority. The city light streaming through the tall windows painted elongated reflections across the marble floor, adding depth and warmth to the space, and I moved with a growing sense of ease, my actions deliberate and confident, the awareness of being quietly supported providing an unexpected comfort that allowed me to breathe more fully. Each interaction, each careful gesture, reinforced a sense of belonging that had been absent before, and I realized that the evening had shifted from a challenge into a space where I could operate with intention, where my accent and presence were no longer points of doubt but features acknowledged and accommodated. The final glasses were refilled, the last trays returned to the service area, and I paused, feeling the culmination of hours of careful attention, the smooth rhythm of the evening, and the subtle, quiet authority that had shaped the room into a space where confidence, poise, and grace were possible. Dominic's presence, unwavering and silent, ensured that the night ended with a sense of calm, order, and dignity, leaving a lasting impression not just on the guests but on me, a deep, unspoken understanding that in this world, subtle authority and careful attention could create safety, respect, and a quiet sense of triumph.